Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Nicci Chats 2. As some of you may know, I've been on a little bit of a hiatus for the past year, but I am back now and really, really excited to get back into this and start interviewing some cool people. So if you do know any people that are worth interviewing, please do get in touch with me. For those of you that are new to the show, Nicci Chats 2 is really a weekly podcast about changing your perspectives and giving you a different view on the world. So I interview people who challenge me, who challenge conventional thinking, and get their thoughts on different subjects. So today, for my first guest back for almost a year, I am chatting to Gabby Cowling. Gabby is a very good friend of mine, and she is also the master distiller, as she calls herself, at the Creative Distillery. But Gabby is really a branding and communications expert, and her and I have had quite a few discussions around different ways of communicating, about growing brands, about building sustainable companies, and all of those kind of things that we both feel very passionately about. So Gabby, how's it? Thank you for being here.
Hey, Nix, thank you so much. It's really great to be here and to chat live with you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, welcome. So, Gabs, the first thing that we kind of spoke about, and the kind of topic that we're going to discuss today, I'm just going to jump right in, is really around kind of taking your values off the wall. So, what does this mean? I mean, are you saying that values are an outdated cultural icon? What do you mean by that? Just elaborate on that for me, please.
Sure. So absolutely not. I think values are absolutely critical to a critical aspect to a company or a brand's culture. And I think really what that statement really means is that, you know, a lot of brands, most brands or most organizations, small, medium to large, have a set of values. But I think very often we found when we walk into organizations to help them, you know, to help them sort of find themselves and to find out where things might be going wrong, is that, you know, the values are sort of there, but very often you'll go to the organization with people within the organization sort of below leadership level and sort of say, well, what are the values? And very often people are sort of waiting and looking around for the post on the wall that lists them. And, you know, it's all very well to have your values up on the wall or, you know, on a mug or wherever it may be. But critically, it's about entrenching those cultural values into the organization. So what are those values? What do they mean? And then engaging your audience, you'll get your internal audience and your external to a degree around what that means. So a word like, you know, passion. What does that mean for our organization? What is that lingo? What is that language? What are those behavioral traits that we as an organization need to deliver in order to deliver on the brand promise? Because ultimately that's what people of the organization need to do. And also it's a fantastic way to, you know, your culture is how you attract and retain your top talent. And if everybody's aligned to those values and those behaviors and delivering on them, then really that is around delivering organizational excellence, and, you know, the great brand delivery is really what it's about. Yeah, so that's really it. It's about, you know, let's live them, let's believe in them, and let's buy into them, because you know, we all understand that cultural misalignment can be a big problem in an organization if people aren't aligned and delivering on those behaviors or behaving in a certain way.
So, Gabs, when you talk about brand promise, what does that mean? Because, you know, these are words that people like you and I use who are in the industry, but larger organizations tend to be a little bit better at this because they do have the resources and the structures. But I found even kind of your more medium-sized companies, let's say 200 to 400 people, don't necessarily have the talent branding or whatever that job title may be or even possibly marketing department to actually implement these things. So what is the brand promise? What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, often brands, and I do agree with you. I mean, larger organizations obviously have the resources and have the expertise and the experience and those things, resources being not only people, but also financial resources to behind this. But I think organizations, and you speak of marketing departments, and we will make a promise to an audience, and we see promises in the retail space all the time. How can I help you? So I just use that just as a one to mind. And those kinds of things can be quite challenging, because that is a promise we're making to our customer or our client. And in B2B, in any situation, a brand is making a promise of service excellence, delivery, whatever it may be, product excellence, all those kinds of things. But if the people behind that aren't sort of haven't bought into or understand what that is and how they are expected to deliver that, right from the lady who sits at the reception to the debtors clerk, who's very often sort of downstairs in a dark room. People forget about those people, and they're a fundamental part of delivering on what it is we are as a brand promising our consumers or our end user. And also, a brand promise is also just as important to the people that we attract into our organization. So if I am, and we know a lot of the big brands are doing a lot of attraction, they're looking at the graduates, university top grads, in whichever area it may be. Those people are also really kind of interrogating the brand promise. So, when I go into this organization, you're telling me something about your brand externally, but when I actually talk to the people on the ground, when I go and talk to, Mavis, who works the reception desk, or whoever it may be, a friend of mine that works in the organization, is the brand what it promises it's going to be for me here as an employee, but also critically to people who are our clients or our customers. So it really is important that the people of the organization and the organization itself understands and actively works at enabling its people to deliver on that.
Okay. So when you talk about a promise, that's a promise to, whether you call them stakeholders, whether you call them target markets, and this language seems to get blended a lot lately, but it's a promise across the board, because often when we think about our target markets, we look at, we're a B2B company and we target companies in the technology space, or we're a B2C company and we sell to, middle class women between the ages of 35 and 45. It's kind of this, our target market is the external, we're going outside. But so what you're saying is kind of bringing that target market inside and going, how is this market here, the people around us and the people who are potentially going to be around us, so the kind of people that we want to attract, is as much of an important segment as the people out there. So we kind of almost looking at two different groups of target markets or stakeholders.
Absolutely. And as you say, I think back in past, that was how it was. I think for me, my passion does very much in terms of what we do lies in that is understanding that internal audience. Fundamentally, I think companies are really understanding the power of culture, attracting to a strong, well-defined, well-operated culture. And I think we find, and we are finding more and more, that that's become important. But I think, in days gone by or in the past, it was kind of thought of, but where do we spend our time and our effort? But I think reinforcing exactly what you've just said, if we don't really kind of interrogate that and define that culture, yes, it's led from the top, and often a lot of those things are architected at the top. But I think we need to, very importantly, and that's where we work really hard with our clients, is to help them then, how do we then align and create those linkages, so that, and find tactics through that strategy to really embed that promise and that behavior, and what it is we're trying to do or give to our external audience. That's a fundamental part of what we need to do, and I think it's a critical part. Is to understand that is one of your most important audiences, I would say.
What do you think? I know obviously you don't work in the recruitment space. This is a communications driven initiative and strategy. But What do you think has shifted in the last, I mean, let's say since COVID? Because companies have always had the problem of talent attraction and retention. What has shifted? Why has this become such a big issue? Like, why has employee engagement all of a sudden like become so elevated and become such a big talking point?
Well, I mean, I think, it's, I mean, a lot of people, it's a big question that's been asked a lot and we over and over again. And and I think we all know that obviously through COVID, I mean, our workplace and our engagement with the people we worked with shifted fundamentally, going online. And for a long time, we were all isolated. And a lot of, I think then we came out of COVID and companies, there was that sort of that transition phase where a lot of, especially, well, a lot of companies, I think bigger companies possibly more so, struggled with how do we now bring our people back in. And there's been, I think, a lot of resistance to that. I think the work from home, the work from home opportunity really created a lot of flexibility for people. And now there's other issues. Now you want me back? Don't you trust me? Don't you think I can do my job? And so there's a lot of I think turmoil around it and a lot of conflict. So, but we were speaking about it the other day. I think as much as people, there is that work from home, that flexibility and all those kinds of things, there's a lot we're missing out as human beings. I mean, people work with people, relationships. I think engagement is harder when you don't have a workforce on site. And I think, as I said, there's a lot of organizations trying to do some sort of hybrid model because they recognize that when people work together in a room or in a building and connect, we are possibly going to get higher levels of engagement because we do as people, so equal, engage and connect and I think do better.
Yeah.
But there is resistance to that. So I think it's about trying to find the balance of bringing people on site, understanding how organizational cultures maybe need to shift in terms of how they express those or engage people and what activities those might be, so that they aren't also disengaging with some of their top talent because they're feeling pressurized, not trusted, angry because maybe the communication around that has been poor. So yeah, it's tricky. And I think we are certainly as specialists in this area and with our clients also trying to find new ways to do that and to help them engage around things like culture and how do we bring values to life and how do we create advocates through our employees around things like lived experience when we have very, very different hybrid models and very different organizational models and structures across different organizations. So yeah, it's a challenge and it's not an easy one, but it's a fun challenge, and I think it's an ongoing one, and it's going to be interesting to see what our conversation is perhaps in a year when maybe we've all moved on and COVID is no longer always in the conversation, because hopefully one day that will happen. That COVID is not.
I hope so. Yeah, that's so interesting, because I heard a really interesting statistic, and I don't know whether this is US based or across the board, that people are more likely to stay in jobs where they have a friend at work. So above even financial reward, culture, all of those kind of things, if I've got friends and that sense of community at work, I'm more likely to stay in that particular position. And I can tell you from my own experience that having worked with clients that where I'm in their office and present and around, I've made friends with them. Whereas clients that I've only worked strictly remotely with, I've never made friends, because we never have that opportunity to connect and to chat and kind of, those like what we used to call them water cooler conversations. We don't really have those anymore. But having said that, like, I do fully understand the flexibility of working remotely, that it gives me a chance to, well, I mean, not that I have to fetch kids from school, but I understand that people do have to do this. It gives me a chance. I can go and ride my horse in the morning and not have to stress about what time I need to be in the office. And, they going to gym, going for a walk. These are things that we wouldn't necessarily do in the office. So it feels almost like companies kind of need to do a little bit of a sales job on coming back, and they're not necessarily doing that so well. And once again, it's our values that are getting back to that, stuck on the wall and not really being properly implemented.
Well, that's it. And I mean, I do understand. I mean, there's so many different reasons why some organizations have to be full on, at work. And that, again, as I say, every story, every brand, every organization is unique. But 100%, I mean, even in our organization, which is a small, our core team is small, but, once a week, definitely we make sure that we engage, and we're also constantly evaluating, our values. Like, what are we looking to do? What are we hoping to achieve? If we need to reset. And I think that's also important, as you said, and totally. I mean, friends, people, as I said before, people connect with people. We get so much more out of personal engagements. But then again, as you say, the ability to be able to run a day of not having to sit in an office or go to 100 million meetings that are, everybody talks about these hour meeting. How much time and energy we save through not doing unnecessary meetings that could just be a 15 minutes. So I think it's finding the balance, but it's constantly, and again, communication. I mean, communication is always something that highlights whenever we look into brands and we start sort of saying that, they're coming to us and saying, we're just not connecting. People aren't engaging us. They're not buying into this. And one of the key things that always comes out when we start talking to the people is communication. And that obviously is very broad in itself, but it comes from, as you say, I think everything that we do and that we want to do has to come from that cultural set of which, as I said before, values is a fundamental pillar. And that needs to, and communication has to be thought out very carefully so that it can also be appropriate, as I said in the beginning, because every organizational structure and reason for whichever model they adopt is important,
Gabs, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. And this is going to be quite a broad statement. I'm not going to ask you for specifics, but I know a lot of the conversations that you and I have been a part of where people are saying they want people to come back to work, and the first reaction is mistrust, where, like, you said it earlier, do you not think I'm working? What are you trying to, like, what's going on here? We've been functioning quite well. Do you think, and some of these are big organizations, big established organizations who spent millions and millions building up their culture, do you think that there was possibly a flaw in that culture to begin with, and now this response is just highlighting it? Because if I'm working for a company, I mean, let's just use one of the top 10 best companies to work for, because we've heard people saying that this has been the response from their employees and their teams. Do you think possibly their culture wasn't that entrenched in the first place? If my immediate response to being recalled to the office is, oh my word, they don't trust me. So how strong was that culture in the first place?
Yeah, interesting one. Because, and I think, it also, when I think about it, immediately my thought goes to maybe a larger sort of structure where you've got multi-layers. And that is always much more complex in terms of filtering down a culture, because, if you go to for instance, a logistics organization where you've got your leadership, your senior levels, then you've got your middle management, then you go right down to blue collar factory workers, entrenching a culture right through that organization is difficult. We've worked with brands to do that because we've also had organizations where in the factory, they've believed that the values on the wall are actually for their customers. They didn't believe that they were actually their values that they were supposed to buy into. So, to answer your question, I think possibly, yeah, there are flaws, and that can also exist because of human beings. Because yes, there has been a misalignment along the way. So you might have from a leadership perspective, it's understood, but then it gets, it's a bit like a broken telephone. You might have a manager in the process, or who has a team, or who has a group, a team under him, and maybe there isn't any trust, and maybe the cultural misalignment is because we haven't actually attracted talent towards our culture, so we've actually got people who perhaps aren't trustworthy. Or so, I think there's a number of ways to sort of answer that question. But yeah, I think there could be a break in that. And I think it's easier in a bigger organization. Obviously, if you're a smaller company, a smaller organization, it's easier to manage because there aren't so many layers. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and I think that's why it is becoming more and more and more important to really understand what that is, and also what your culture is, how it's defined, and how it's delivered, and how it's believed, and lived, and for it to be also, I think, quite simple, because I think the more complex we make these things, the harder it is for some people to sort of understand. How do I live this? Is this really how I feel? So, yeah, I think it's quite a tricky one because, I think organizations, I think trust is probably a value that probably exists in 90% of, we always like to try and say that when we go into organizations, we look at the personality, and we try and not have the stock standard value statements, because that can also become confusing. So how do we the cultural language, the language of the organization, the personality of the brand, so that we express values in a way that is meaningful to that personality? And I think then it becomes easier for the people of that brand to then go, okay, I get it. And you see some really cool ones where organizations have really kind of spent a lot of time going, this is who we are, and the people behind us believe it, they live it every day, and then you see great success, and all those things like trust and integrity and things like that just fall into place. They become hygiene,
I love what you're saying about simplicity. So there's a comment here from Matthew Gibbon. He said, I've been working remotely for 20 plus years. However, communication and being on the same page is a vital part of success. And it feeds into what you're saying about keeping things simple, because the more complex the message that you're trying to convey is, the more difficult it is. And I mean, I always look at this from a political standpoint. If you look at when, for instance, way back when Donald Trump was about to be elected president, the Democrats were kind of, their message tended to be a little bit more complex, whereas his message, whether you agreed with it or not, was very simple. It was very straightforward. It's like, I'm building a wall to protect us from Mexico. That, foreigners are wrong, we are right, make America great again. It was very simple. It was very simple, very clear, and it worked.
Yeah, they could stand behind it, because make America great why would you not stand behind that? As you say, the Donald Trump and all of that is another debate, but absolutely. I mean, it's strong, it's simple, I get it. I kind of know what I've got to do, absolutely. Yeah.
So Gabs, because it's great. Okay, it's great that we've just spent almost the past half an hour talking about ostensibly what is all of this theory. Where do we start with this? Because I'm, as you know, always very big on the how. What are practical things, obviously outside of calling both of us, which we would really encourage you to do, because as you can see, we're very clever and we know what we're talking about. Where would companies start with this? What would be a starting point, something they can do this afternoon or tomorrow morning to get this process going?
So I think, again, brands and companies are in different stages. We're working with brands that are very newly established, and that's fantastic, because then it's really about, then it's establishing those principles. And again, it's something that it's never set for life. It's a moving, growing thing. But I think it's about asking, brands reflecting a little bit and asking the sort of hard questions, because, we're busy. We are, whatever we're doing, we're making widgets, we're selling, insurance, whatever the case may be, we're hard at work to do what we do. And it's taking a step back and sort of saying, are we happy have we got a clearly defined culture? Are we just asking those simple questions? Even if you walked around and said sort of to the guy who's, the machine operator, do you know what our values are and what do they mean to you? I mean, that it might sound a little sort of simplistic and stuff, but really, I think it's about asking yourself those questions. And because, also when we are, for instance, our HR people, or we're looking for people, we're trying to attract the top talent, are we looking at are we aligning that to a culture, and what is that, and what is that process to make sure, because we all know how expensive it is to hire the wrong person, so I would just say, do we feel we are strong enough in that, and could we be better? I think we could always be better. And often we go into brands who literally say, we think we're okay, but I think we could be a lot better. And very often when we step in that from that objective perspective, that we do that kind of work, which is go around and do a little bit of an analysis, or ask those questions, and then we could say, okay, well, yeah, you've got that, but there are gaps, and this is how we can close those gaps. So I think it's just sort of, really asking that question and being honest in terms of the answer. And I think it's very quick through just maybe having a few chats around the water cooler to define where you're at, and I think, as I said, some brands are doing it fantastically well. And I do say, I think perhaps in the SME space, brands, we've also worked with brands that have just grown so phenomenally quickly. And so that is kind of, they're just bringing that along. And then suddenly, they've suddenly gone from 10 to 50 people. And then they're not really sure why suddenly, the head of sales is just not getting it, and his team, because it's grown so quickly. So, there's lots of challenges, but it's all fixable.
So I think, so they kind of, if I can almost sort of sum up what you're saying, I think they're kind of two key words that stood out for me. Or, I mean, you didn't necessarily use this word, but the first one is really around intentionality, like not allowing this thing to, because we know, like, a culture is going to happen whether you like it or not. So actually going, this is the direction that I want to steer the ship in, and being very intentional about that.
100%.
And then the next kind of part of that is really looking at almost creating those feedback loops, where we actually are having, whether you call them conscious conversations, whether you call them quick chats, whether you call them surveys, whatever, but how are you consistently creating that feedback to be able to go, hang on, this is working, we don't need to course correct, or actually this isn't working, we do need to course correct, because me as the CEO of the organization, like, I'm perceiving things as being one way. Meanwhile, my people on the floor, my people in my accounts department, my salespeople, whatever the case may be, are actually not communicate, like, that they're not getting this. So it's really creating that consistent cycle of feedback.
I think absolutely, Nick. I mean, you've hit it on the head there. I mean, intentional and creating those. I mean, we say sort of tactics, but those, I love that, conscious conversations, and we're always trying to encourage, organizations. As, again, we tend to, where it tends to fall is, it's about, okay, we've established this, it's fantastic. We've done some posters, we've done a few activations, now let's all carry on. And I think that loop is fundamental to the success of cultural excellence, if you like, in organizations, because if we're not constantly creating whatever loop that may be, and in every organization it's different, due to whatever it might be, size, or or the nature, or the levels, or whatever it might be. But if we're not constantly having those conversations, or assessing, or looking at it and thinking about it, it can get ahead of us, or get away from us, and then there ends up being more work to do in the end, I think. So yeah, absolutely, 100% intentional, having conversations and keeping up with it, because it does change as the world changes,
Yeah. So Yeah, Matthew's putting in lots of comments. Thanks for that, Matthew. I appreciate it. So saying like 3 of the greatest work principles: consistency, change, and balance. And I mean, yeah, I think change and balance are kind of we could probably unpack those another time, but definitely it's consistent. Like this is not a once-off thing. This is an ongoing process that needs to be evaluated. It needs to be updated. It possibly needs to be changed depending on what's happening. But this isn't a once-off, to put it
And
bluntly.
again, you look at change in leadership. I mean, I saw the other day that we've got a big leader leaving Discovery, and how does that impact an organization? Because I mean, maybe Discovery is not a great example. I mean, they are very, very well entrenched in terms of their value set, and that's not necessarily going to shift it maybe too much. But will it? Because he has a team that reports to him. He has a set of the way he interprets those values. So yeah, I think that brands need to be cognizant of that, is, as you say, because a shift in leadership can have a huge impact on the way that then continues, that cultural, the delivery of that culture gets adopted or not, based on his, on that the new leadership.
And I think it's I think people actually underestimate the impact of shift in leadership, because as much as you think you've got this kind of really well established organization and it almost becomes infallible, so whoever we are so entrenched that the incoming CEO or whatever the position may be at a high level can't break what the existing or the outgoing CEO created. But I mean, we've seen that with Disney, where they actually recalled, I mean, they had Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, so Bob 1 and Bob 2, where they actually recalled, I think it was Bob Iger, if I've got them the right way around, because the company stopped making money. We've seen it here in South Africa with Pick n Pay, where they've actually recalled their previous CEO, Sean Summers, because the company stopped making money. Now, when you look at, I mean, for those of you who are watching internationally, Pick n Pay is a retail brand here in South Africa, massive brand, very, very well established, very long history. I mean, I think I don't even know how many years it's been around for, but it really
80 odd or something.
80 odd years, yeah. So strong established brand, and yet, I mean, I don't know how many other leadership changes were happening, but when you look at that shift, and I mean, you take Disney, which is an international brand, just that shift of one person at a very high leadership level actually it maybe took a couple of years, but it had a massive impact. So, don't ever underestimate that shift in leadership and the impact that can have when it trickles down.
100%. Absolutely. And I mean, there's hundreds of examples of it. And I think it's fundamental. So it's something that brands need to consider when that is a shift to, as you said, there again is another conscious conversation, but at perhaps a different level. We can't, just because we are the guys that make the decision doesn't mean that, we shouldn't be having that conversation, figuring out how we're going to, how that move or that new person is going to either come in, or do we need to make some shifts, and how do we bring people along with us on that journey so that we don't get chaos and ultimately impact the success of the brand.
Yeah. Okay, Gabs, our last question. I find that particularly smaller business owners tend to hook into phrases or like these anecdotes or whatever. I often get told the famous one, I still don't even know if it's true, I keep meaning to Google it, well, Richard Branson can't read a balance sheet, so why do I need to know about my finances? We kind of hook into these things. Your thoughts on strategy eats culture, culture eats strategy, I messed it up, culture eats strategy for breakfast, because that is one of those that always gets thrown around. What are your thoughts on that?
So if how do I interpret that culture eats strategy for breakfast? Are we saying that culture supersedes strategy, or the other way around. I think that one needs to find the right linkages. I don't think either can exist without the other. And I think culture is part of our strategy. I think the word strategy is often also misused or misinterpreted or misunderstood, because there is the business strategy, the strategy, and it's quite a scary word. And I think it could actually think of a nicer word. But I think that culture, strategy, people, results, they're all very well, it's about finding the right linkages between them all. And I think, and finding the balance, because I think one does not exist without the other. And I think in the overall strategic thinking, one is, culture is an incredibly strong pillar. And within culture, there's people, and then obviously ultimately we're looking for the right results. So I don't know if that answers your question, because I hadn't really thought of it in terms of that phrase, but yeah, that would be my immediate response to that.
Yeah. So effectively, it's you need that balance. The one can't, and okay, interestingly enough, that's getting back to what Matthew was saying about balance, but you actually need a balance between culture, strategy, people. Like, the one cannot exist without the other.
Sorry, Nix, I interrupted you. I was just saying, I was asked a very interesting question the other day about, what comes first? Do we have the brand or the marketing? And I was just saying, I don't think anything ever exists in a sort of a horizontal. I think it's, things are being done in parallel. But I think, one has to sort of look at all of those aspects in terms of establishing your brand. And the strategy, as I say, has all of those components, all those pillars within it. And then we're constantly looking at all of those things in parallel. Sorry.
So there's a comment. No, not at all. There's a comment from Kerry. She's just saying, she's put a question mark, so I'm assuming she's asking the question, but strategy creates culture too. And I personally do agree with that, because I think how you position your company, if you are incredibly innovative and constantly moving and changing and shifting, that's going to be a very dynamic, innovative, that kind of culture, versus a mining company, for instance, which can still be innovative, but it's a slower, more steady, more entrenched kind of culture. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think what I said earlier was, I think that, within that strategy, I don't think either can exist without the other. And I think strategy is kind of where we start, isn't it? When we start a business, it's like, and again, the name strategy, but it's culture is a fundamental kind of list on the, what do we stand for? Who are we? What is our value set? What does that mean? So culture is a big line item on our strategy, in our first strategy meeting, and perhaps every strategy meeting. Because strategy is almost like our map, isn't it? So, if you don't have a map, anyone will take you there. So, on our map, there's the balance, there's the finances, there's the people, and the culture, there's all of those aspects. So absolutely, I think it's a big line item in our strategy.
Awesome. Well, Gabby, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really have enjoyed chatting to you, and clearly the people who've been watching have as well, because I've gotten a lot of comments. I know you can't see them, but they have been coming in quite thick and fast. Where can people reach you?
Cool. Well, the Creative Distillery. So I'm on LinkedIn, my personal profile, Gabby Cowling, or onto our website, which is creativedistillery.co.za. There's sort of contact details there. So we can always, if people want to, perhaps in the chat, we are going to post this. We can always also put in a link in terms of an email address, which is as simple as gabby@creativedistillery.co.za. So various touch points. But I'd love to chat further and see how we can, if possibly, help brands with strategy, culture, and results.
Fantastic. And please do, I will be sharing a link to subscribe to my mailing list to get copies of Nicci Chats 2 sent directly to you in your inbox whenever I have the interviews. But Gabby, thank you so much. It's really been fantastic having you. And please take care, everybody. And I will be seeing you soon. Have a wonderful Thursday. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.